Namaskar, everybody. Good morning. Friends, over the last couple of months, we have had talks on the challenges and conditions of spiritual life. Today's theme happens to be power of spiritual practice. Let us begin with a direct question. First of all, is spiritual life practical? Does it help in real life situations, or is it all only ideas and theories? Why I raise this question is, there is often a dispute between practical people and spiritual people. The so-called practical people think that unless something is useful, it is worthless. Because spiritual ideals seem vague and impractical to them, they don't have a positive attitude towards spirituality. But it is for all to see that the way these practical people go about life actually turns out to be impractical in the long run. When they become too practical, they end up making themselves restless and unhappy by heightening their worldly desires and so increasing the causes of their frustration. They ruin themselves in the end. So spiritual people are, after all, not so impractical when they cultivate the inward life, because it is this alone that brings lasting peace of mind. Now, what do we mean by an inward life? What exactly is a prayerful, meditative life? It is a life that is guided and governed by the spiritual ideal. It is a life that is characterized by an understanding of spiritual principles. When this quality is absent, then the true purpose of human life is lost. Many people will say that their goal is to enjoy the world. Of course, enjoyment has a place in human life, but even for that, a peaceful state of mind is essential. Unless God is the main objective of life, our desires will only multiply, and we will be constantly running after the objects of our desires. And this, in turn, creates a state of increasing tension. If everybody is practically insane over the fulfillment of their own worldly desires, a clash of personalities is inevitable. Because this desire for material enjoyment brings out the spirit of competition, which leads to quarrels and conflicts, both in private lives and in the wider social life. So we need to install God in our lives by all means. And this can only be done through the practice of prayer and meditation. Otherwise, God will not remain the ideal, because we will have installed ourselves in His place. So whether one is seeking God as the goal of one's life, or whether one feels oneself inadequate to cope with life's problems, or whether one is just disillusioned with the world, everyone has to have something to keep up the sustaining power in their lives. And here lies the importance of spiritual practices like prayer, meditation, and the rest. Through spiritual practice, one can achieve whatever one wants in the right way. That is why we say spiritual practice gives power. Now, this raises a question. What do we expect from spiritual exercises? We may ask, who is there that has achieved everything through prayer? First of all, it is not commonly understood that this is possible, to achieve everything by leading a spiritual life. Beyond that, it is necessary to know how to pray and to whom to pray. People fail to get what they want, and then they complain. But they never blame themselves. When they don't get what they want, they hold God responsible. They don't stop to think that maybe they haven't given any attention to God, or they haven't approached Him for the solution of their problems. If only they thought seriously, they would find that their failure is due to a lack of understanding of the method of spiritual exercises. If we pray, we must pray to God. If we pray to God, we don't have to pray to anybody else. God is all-loving. God is all-powerful. He is the one who can give us what we need. Others can only give a little of what they themselves have. But how can they give me peace if they don't have peace in their own lives? Moreover, limited beings can't give anything unlimited. The infinite alone can give us that abiding peace. Sri Ramakrishna and his disciples have assured us that we can reach God just by praying to Him. If we really pray to God, if we can cry to God with a real cry, as Sri Ramakrishna said, we are sure to find Him. The next question concerns the method of spiritual practice. How should one pray? Prayer fails and becomes meaningless when there is no contact with God. Most people pray in a mechanical sort of way. They go through certain forms, utter the words, read from the books, but their minds are anywhere but in the thought of God. So there is no contact with Him. We read in the Bible that the vain repetition practiced by the faithless is useless. What is mechanical, what is lifeless, doesn't become effective. That is why the prayers are not answered, and people neither get what they want, nor do they move Godward. Prayer only becomes effective, both subjectively and objectively. Subjectively, it brings peace of mind, and objectively, it leads to the attainment of the object of prayer. So prayer becomes effectively in both ways only when the mind is focused on God. From these two points of view, prayer is a failure when a person doesn't have that concentration. So it is necessary to develop a spirit of communion with God. When there is an intense thought of God in prayer, the prayers will be answered. Then the third question is about the object of prayer. What should we pray for? In other words, what is the nature of our prayer? This brings us to the 4 types of spiritual practice. The first type is used by the vast majority of people in order to get what they want. in the form of worldly goods or the fulfillment of their ambitions. This is the lowest form of prayer. Of course, all those things can also be had through prayer, provided people think intensely of God and try to commune with Him, try to be absorbed in Him while they pray. But even if they don't get the material things they want, even if they do get the material things that they want, it is like asking for trouble. Because these things create problems in life, and because they belong to this relative world, they don't last long. Nor can they satisfy the infinite within us. On the contrary, they stand between us and God, and they won't let us approach Him. The second type of prayer is used for the attainment of higher qualities. I mean, what are commonly known as qualities of the head and heart. If we study this form of prayer as a spiritual discipline, we will see how it results in the integration of the total personality. For example, devotees pray for knowledge, devotion, and renunciation. They don't care much about wealth, power, or honor. They only say, God, give me faith, give me the intelligence to think of you. Make me pure, truthful, and humble so that I can live harmoniously and lovingly in this world. Let me have strength, courage, and calmness so that I can live under adverse circumstances and still realize my spiritual goal. This is how devotees pray. When we read the lives of some great devotees, we find that all of them prayed in this way, and all of them were blessed with these good qualities. They had all the glorious qualities that a human being can have. The third kind of practice is concentration and meditation. Here, one doesn't pray for anything. There is just joy in the thought of God. So what do we gain? Briefly, a person of concentration and meditation gains everything that is to be gained in life. One who constantly communes with God and asks for nothing else will have knowledge of God. Even from the practical point of view, we find that such seekers generally don't suffer from physical want. It is amazing that they don't pray even for the basic bare necessities, and yet they get them somehow. We find proof of this in the lives of mystics and saints. They had everything they required. Some of them have even had a comfortable life, though they didn't ask for it. God gave them what they needed. He knows the requirements of His devotees. He too expresses His love for them just as they offer their devotion to Him. We don't realize that God does take care of us. We think we have to take care of ourselves. And then we make blunder after blunder and lose what we want to gain. Because we are so short-sighted and so narrow-minded. In our anxiety for gain, we forget that if we have patience and depend on God, trying to think of Him and always meditating on Him, He supplies everything of His own accord. We see this happen in real life. We ask for things that become a burden to us. We want things of the world, and the things of the world bring trouble with them and destroy our peace. So it turns out that the person who is in constant communion with God through love and devotion is the wisest of all. It's a fact that through deep concentration and meditation, a person gains tremendous power of mind. It is not generally understood what is meant by the practice of concentration and meditation, or to put it simply, in our context, what is meant by intense thought of God. This requires some clarification because we don't have the habit of thinking of God always. In the actual practice of concentration and meditation, the mind is focused on an aspect of God that one loves and adores. In order to have deep concentration on God, there has to be an emotional relationship with Him. This is most important. Then the mind naturally goes to Him. When there is devotion and adoration, it means the person has an amount of love for God. True, this kind of love can't be had immediately. The aspirant has to first choose an aspect of God that appeals to him or her. Then they must try to focus the mind on that living, luminous, and blissful form of that divine personality without thinking of anything else. Then it is also necessary to think of God's divine attributes and qualities simultaneously. What happens is that as one succeeds in visualizing the form of God, one spontaneously begins to manifest God's divine attributes. What one thinks constantly, that one becomes. We read of instances in the lives of several mystics where even the physical constitution of the meditator underwent change because of intense thought of God. But why mystics? It is common experience that our body undergoes change according to the nature and intensity of thought. When we experience anger, fear, or hatred, there is an unpleasant tension in the whole body-mind system. And when we have thoughts of love and affection, the entire body-mind relaxes. In the same way, when a person meditates intensely on God, the Beloved, the waves of the mind quiet down and bodily functions automatically become rhythmical and harmonious. And when the mystics had deep spiritual experiences like samadhi or superconsciousness, it left them totally transformed. But what about minds that can hardly think of God in the traditional way that I am talking about? I mean, thinking of God as a person with name and form doesn't suit all temperaments. Such people can take a symbol of God signifying some universal divine qualities, such as light and space, light for infinite knowledge, or space for unbounded freedom, and try to focus the mind on that. So, aspirants who have difficulty using a personality as an object of concentration, they can meditate on any representation of Sat-Chit Ananda. There are certain aids that can be used in the practice of concentration and meditation. We know how extremely changeful and restless the mind is. Most people can hardly focus the mind on one object or idea for more than a few seconds because the untrained mind is in the habit of thinking a series of different thoughts and going through successive experiences and states of consciousness. So it is quite natural that they find it difficult to concentrate on one thing intensely, even for a brief period. This is where regular spiritual disciplines like study of holy books, ritual worship, devotional singing, repetition of God's name, and the like are extremely helpful. They prepare the mind for concentration, which later leads to meditation. So, all major traditions, for example, recommend repetition of a particular name of God, japa. As you know, a mantra is a technical name of God representing a particular aspect of the divine. It is widely used for higher spiritual development. When a person repeats a mantra, the mind is attracted to that form of God which the name represents. As repetition prolongs, the aspirant tries to visualize that particular form and gradually enters into meditation on that aspect of God. But as I said, the mind is so restless that it takes some time for any aspirant to develop that power of concentration. So we need not be discouraged when we find it difficult to practice. As the Bhagavad Gita says, through constant practice, the fickleness of the mind can be overcome. Even when we don't seem to be making progress in our practice of concentration, we should remember that the very struggle will gradually straighten and strengthen the mind. Then the next important thing is regularity of practice. An aspirant should sit for prayer and meditation every day, at least in the morning and evening, for a fixed period of time. Beginners may start with just 15-minute periods and gradually increase the duration. In this form of practice, one must not be impatient. If one steadily practices for a few months, regardless of the degree of progress, one is bound to grow. Slow and steady wins the race. We people have very little idea of the enormous power that is said to be latent in the human mind. According to yoga, any material object, however subtle, can be manipulated by the mind. Patanjali's yoga mentions advanced practitioners who can concentrate their minds on subtle particles of matter, tanmatras. When their minds are absorbed in those subtle particles, they are said to understand the laws of nature directly and immediately, and they can control nature. With their mental power, they can also control gross manifestations like heat and cold, wind and rain. Patanjali even lists the actual methods for gaining control over the laws of physical nature. There have been authentic cases of yogis even demonstrating that power of control. But, however, our interest is in knowing God through concentration and meditation. The highest and best result of this threefold practice of prayer, concentration, meditation is that the devotee becomes intimately connected with God. Years and years of arduous practice have the effect of purifying the heart. In that pure heart develops intense love of God. And then God's love too begins to flow unobstructed to the devotee. A strong bond of love binds God and his devotee together. In that sublime state, with the attainment of pure love, whenever the devotee prays to God to reveal himself, God, out of his mercy and grace, does grant that desire of the devotee. It is impossible for people like us to comprehend it, but real devotees, like the great mystics, were able to see God whenever they wished. And these great souls have told us that God does become bound to the devotee provided the devotee has single-minded devotion and love for God. So we see that prayer, concentration, and meditation have tremendous power. They have the power to show God to us. What more could we want? But again, that brings up the age-old question of the place of divine grace in spiritual experience. Does the devotee have to do everything oneself, or is the grace of God active too? The answer is that grace has an important place in spiritual experience. In a manner of speaking, in that plane, there is cooperation between God and his seeker. The idea is that the grace of God can be experienced only when the devotee has made oneself receptive by purifying oneself through the practice of prayer, concentration, and meditation. And by making one's mind one-pointed and directing it to God. Only then can one feel the grace and presence of God. The wind of God's grace is always blowing, as Sri Ramakrishna said. But lazy sailors on the sea of life can't take advantage of it. It is only the active and the strong who work to keep their minds unfurled to catch the friendly breeze. And so they reach their destination sooner. But God is equal to all. Now, finally, we come to the fourth type of prayer, which is the last and the highest. It can only be practiced by the rare few, and that is direct communion with God in samadhi. In this state, the seeker is face to face with God. This is also prayer in the sense that in this state there is intense and unbroken thought of God. Or, to be more precise, there is absorption in God. Some may not call that prayer, they would rather call it the fulfillment of prayer. Whatever it is, the soul that has once experienced this state of profound communion wants to remain in it forever. So it is regarded by some of the greatest mystics as the supreme form of prayer or worship. When a soul has attained to that state, there is nothing more to be known, nothing more to be achieved. That is why it is said that the greatest power a human being can have can be had through a simple practice like prayer. Of course, this fourth level of prayer can only be reached by the rarest of the rare, as I said. But the third type, concentration and meditation on God, can be practiced more or less by everyone. Even if one is functioning on the physical plane and desire things of the world, one can start with the elementary or first type of prayer. Sometimes we see people change radically even as a result of praying for something perfectly material from God. There are dramatic illustrations in the lives of some great saints who were once thoroughly worldly, and in some cases, downright ignoble people. It may sound inconsistent because some of them had no love for God at all, and a few of them were even positively hateful towards God and His devotees. However, although they hated God, they thought of Him constantly because of their intense feeling. That means their lives were affected by this intense thought of God, even though they hated God rather than adored Him. Whether we touch fire intentionally or unintentionally, the fire is sure to burn us. So, there have been many souls who started their spiritual life desiring things of the world, but the thought of God changed their lives. It is this intense thought of God that is important. This is what changes our inner nature, and we gradually evolve from the lower to the higher forms of prayer. The more we think of God, in whatever way, the more our inner life changes. Now, so much about the spiritual gains of prayer, concentration, and meditation. But what about their practical benefits? Well, these days we are all anxious to get rid of mental and physical tension, or at least reduce it. We want to learn how to overcome mental and physical fatigue. Some 50 or 60 years ago, doctors and therapists were prescribing exercises for the relaxation of the neuromuscular system. Their objective was to eliminate certain functional disorders like stomach trouble, heart ailments, and hypertension, which were the inevitable effect of leading a modern life. But since then, they too have realized how helpful the practice of concentration and meditation is in removing stress and conserving energy. This is how it works. Whenever meditation is recommended to patients, they are generally instructed to go through some preliminary exercises, which are very necessary for practicing meditation properly. These exercises lead to a relaxation of the neuromuscular system. All teachers of yoga, from Patanjali to Vivekananda, all of them have said that unless the body is in fairly good condition, the mind cannot function properly. The nerve centers must be free for their proper functioning, and the whole nervous system must be relaxed. For that, they prescribe certain postures and breathing exercises. The idea is that, generally speaking, the ordinary mind functions through the nervous system. As a rule, when the mind is calm and peaceful, the nervous system is also tension-free. Unfortunately, most people are not mentally relaxed. There's a great deal of tension and stress. As a result, the neuromuscular system also tightens up correspondingly. So, some simple physical postures and certain basic forms of breath control are a great help in creating a meditative mood of mind and for conserving mental and nervous energy. If we learn how to relax and practice concentration, we can generate enormous mental energy and strengthen our whole nervous system. It's a proven fact that the best way of removing tension and stress is systematic practice of relaxation techniques together with spiritual exercises. When we feel tired even after sleep, sometimes even after 6 or 7 hours of sleep, if we still carry on with our regular spiritual practices of prayer, japa, and meditation, we see our fatigue is largely overcome. We even become fit for sustained concentration. The mind becomes free from tension, making it possible to focus on God even more intensely. If we continue with systematic spiritual practice, we will also see that we become more efficient at work without needing too much rest, and at the same time without becoming too tired. We will be able to work better and remain alert and efficient throughout the day. And in addition to all this, our main objective of life, spiritual unfoldment, that also becomes achievable. Of course, beginners, students, and patients will find spiritual discipline difficult. That is why they need a sympathetic, loving guide or teacher to help them. It is the duty of the teacher to watch over distracted or disorganized pupils with sympathy and lead them gradually, step by step, from the level of relaxation up to the stage of concentration. To begin with, they could be given exercises for artificial relaxation, side by side with some easy technique of dwelling on an aspect of God. Although even this simple method may be difficult for some time. In that case, it is necessary to give them constant encouragement to keep on with the exercises, and they need to be monitored so that they practice regularly, no matter how imperfect they may be. Here also, regularity of practice is most important for long-term stabilization of the mind and body. Then, when the pupils are more or less steady, they can be taught the more important practice of concentration, gradually leading them to meditation. So it is the teacher's duty to guide the pupils through their difficulties and limitations. There have been countless cases where such commitment from the teacher immensely helped the pupils in their emotional integration and development of willpower. The moment the teacher becomes impatient, he not only defeats his own purpose of helping the pupils, but does them great harm. Because once a pupil gets discouraged and becomes irregular or unsteady in spiritual practice, it requires a great deal of new effort for him or her to regain the lost stability. Because the mind of the average person, as we know too well, the mind of the average person is always looking for excuses to be irregular. The mind is like a child seeking its own justifications for laziness. Gradually, when the mind becomes steady in the thought of the spiritual ideal, the entire neuromuscular system is naturally relaxed. As a result, much physical and mental energy is generated and conserved, which is otherwise dissipated. It is known from practical experience that people of concentration can generate a great amount of energy within themselves as a result of this practice. After the period of concentration, their fatigue vanishes and they feel recharged, re energized. So, those who want to reduce fatigue and achieve harmony of body and mind should pay particular attention not only to relaxation exercises, but also to the practice of concentration and meditation, because it is this combination that restores energy and thus helps eliminate functional disorders, if that is what we are interested in. And lastly, the practice of concentration and meditation also stabilizes the emotions and develops willpower. So, even if people are not inspired by the highest spiritual ideal, even if they are only motivated by the practical benefits for the time being, they ought to devote considerable time to the third form of spiritual exercises. That is to say, concentration and meditation. These practices have an incredible effect on our entire body and on our entire body-mind functioning. They can really balance and integrate the whole human personality. So, that is what I wanted to say about both the practical, the so-called practical, and the spiritual benefits of spiritual life. Thank you. Next week, we are going to have revered Swami Brahmarupananda ji giving his usual monthly class on the Ashtavakra Samhita. You're all welcome. So, stay well, take care. No? Ashtavakra Samhita? Next Sunday? Oh, first is you. Oh, sorry. Maharaj will be giving his monthly lecture. Yeah. Not Ashtavakra Samhita. Yeah. Last time he said this is going to. Yeah. Yes. Okay. What are you going to talk about, Maharaj?
Sunday is Swami Bhawatananda's birthday.
Yeah, you have it easy. Okay, it will be very interesting. Yes. Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you. And will we be having snacks?
Yeah. God willing.
Yeah. After the meeting is over, we can all go to the basement and enjoy some snacks.
Namaskaram, everyone. We're going to do one closing song. It's a Ram Bhajan, but the verses are Japore, 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 Japo, Rama Kanama Japo, but we'll replace Ram with Ramakrishna because it's more appropriate. But I would request everyone, at least at the end, the last part will be going something like Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna Nama Japo. So please do join in. It's slightly easy to follow. So please follow along if you feel inspired to. जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो सुबह के व्यक्त जपो और हर शाम जपो सुबह व्यक्त जपो और हर शाम जपो सुबह व्यक्त जपो और हर शाम जपो सुबह व्यक्त जपो और हर शाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो राम नाम जपने से होते हैं कष्ट दूर सभी राम कृष्ण जपने से होते हैं कष्ट दूर सभी राम कृष्ण जपने से होते हैं कष्ट दूर सभी राम कृष्ण जपने से होते हैं कष्ट दूर सभी राम कृष्ण जपने से हो दिल दिल कोयल सुरूर सभी राम कृष्ण जपने से दिल को मिले सुरूर सभी राम कृष्ण जपने से दिल को मिले सुरूर सभी राम कृष्ण जपने से दिल को मिले सुरूर सभी राम कृष्ण नाम जपो सुबह और शाम जपो 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 जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे राम कृष्ण नाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे राम कृष्ण नाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो राम कृष्ण ऐसे है जिसकी न कोई कीमत है राम नाम ऐसे है जिसकी न कोई कीमत है राम कृष्ण ऐसे है जिसकी न कोई कीमत है राम कृष्ण ऐसे है जिसकी न कोई कीमत है रामानुज ऐसे है जो खुद ही एक दौलत है राम कृष्ण ऐसे है जो खुद ही एक दौलत है राम कृष्ण ऐसे है जो खुद ही एक दौलत है राम कृष्ण ऐसे है जो खुद ही एक दौलत है राम की का नाम जपो सुबह और शाम जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो सुबह और शाम जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो सुबह और शाम जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो सुबह और शाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे राम कृष्ण नाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे राम कृष्ण नाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो जपो रे जपो रे जपो रे जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो राम कृष्ण नाम जपो Rama Krishna Nama Japo, Rama Krishna Nama Japo, Rama Krishna Nama Japo, Rama Krishna Nama Japo, Rama Krishna Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna Nama Japo, Rama Krishna Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna Nama Japo, Rama Krishna Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna Rama Japo, Rama Krishna Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna Rama Japo, Rama Krishna Rama Japo.